Hey, Steve Saretsky here. As always, this Canadian real estate market update with a particular focus on Vancouver. If you get any sort of value or entertainment out of these videos, all I ask is that you hit thumbs up and subscribe. I appreciate your support. As always, if you have any questions, comments, put those below and we'll banter back and forth. I'm going to keep this video a little bit shorter. There's a couple things I want to touch on, basically sort of some of the things that you're seeing in the market today from a sort of local micro perspective, and then again pulling into sort of a bigger picture, sort of what's been happening there. And first and foremost, I'm always taking a sort of a pulse on the market, talking with other realtors, seeing what they're seeing, slightly different areas, different markets. But one thing seems to be sort of unanimous is that the condo market has taken a noticeable shift really since March, early April, but it's been noticeable, and particularly in that two-bedroom condo segment, where it seems like buyers are basically unwilling to push prices any higher. There's sort of that resistance. Multiple offers seem to be sort of dwindling, and the typical condo has gone from selling in a week to 2 or 3 weeks now, which is obviously still a pretty tremendous pace, but that's always just taking it into context. But if you look at that from sort of a data perspective, we're looking at the May data. We're seeing Greater Vancouver condo sales dropped 30% on a year-over-year basis. I believe it was a 5-year low for the month. So you had condo sales drop by 30%. At the same time, you had inventory, for sale inventory, actually increase by 40% year over year. So inventory didn't just sort of creep up, inventory just jumped. And yes, it was coming from extremely low levels, historically low levels, but anytime you can get a 40% year over year jump, I think that's definitely a trend that's probably worth watching. And I think that's what we're starting to see in the condo market again, is sort of that resistance. One of my realtor friends over there in Langley, he's active in that Langley market. He's saying that 2 bedrooms, it's been sitting here for 3 weeks, haven't really had any showings. And then I go and I look at the data and I see, wow, okay, well, Langley condo inventory jumped by 73% year over year in May. So I mean, you had a 73% jump, again coming off record lows, but that's certainly a huge jump up, and a trend that you want to be watching is really falling sales combined with rising inventory. It's basically, I mean, you can strip it back down to the bare basics, which is supply and demand, right? Falling demand, i.e. sales, and rising supply, i.e. inventory levels, plus you have the new construction coming on. So certainly a trend we'll be watching here moving forward. I think we're coming into the slower summer months, particularly in August, so I don't think that's going to help with sort of the sales side of things, but we tend to see inventory start to creep back down on a seasonal basis, but we'll have to, again, watch and see how that plays out. Another thing I've touched on previously, but there was a book that I highly recommend reading called Irrational Exuberance by Robert Schiller. Basically the inventor of the Schiller index in the States, which tracks home prices. But he's basically put together a book on sort of human and buyer psychology in financial markets. CMHC actually recently released a report where they basically surveyed 30,000 recent home buyers in some of these Canadian markets, Vancouver, Toronto, Montreal, basically just taking a pulse on their mindset and seeing sort of where they were coming from, and they actually reference some of Schiller's work, which I think he does excellent stuff. Some of the tidbits that I found interesting were 55% of respondents in not only Toronto but Vancouver reported that they engaged in bidding wars in order to secure their property. So, which is, if you're looking today's context, if you look at the city of Vancouver, the percentage of listings which sold above the asking price dipped down to 32% in May of 2018. I believe that was down from about 51% of May of last year. So we're starting to see sort of those, again, those multiple offers starting to dwindle. But it's interesting because obviously CMHC notes, and this doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out, but obviously anytime you engage in bidding wars, it tends to drive prices higher. It tends to create sort of a fear of missing out, where you sort of start to make rush decisions and perhaps go over your budget. I think there was a good chunk of people that also said, yeah, they went over the budget that they had initially set out. So that's, yeah, I mean, that's really interesting stuff that CMHC would actually pull that. So they mark some concerns. They do believe, because you have to look at it as like the typical home buyer basically looks at house prices and they take sort of a poll of the market. They basically look around to see sort of what's going on. They don't have a whole lot of data that they look at. Most people are only buying a house one in every 7-8 years. And so they're sort of looking at, you know, what are people saying at the water cooler, saying, oh, the market's so hot, oh, you got to get in, or you go to a family dinner and someone's saying this, and so not all of it is necessarily fact-based, but you're telling yourself a really compelling story, and that's something that Schiller talks about, is that every sort of financial mania or exuberance needs some sort of really compelling story. And I think that one of the stories that certainly played out in Vancouver, and you know, again, it is certainly partially true, and there's a lot of good stories happening in Vancouver, right? It doesn't really necessarily matter if you have low interest rates. You still need a good story to convince people to basically start borrowing that money. And I think one of the ones that Vancouver experienced was the foreign buyer stuff. Obviously a lot of money pouring in, people sort of panicked, said, oh, you know, we're gonna get taken over, you need to get into the market, and that really just pushed prices higher, and as higher prices beget higher prices. And so we saw that dynamic play out, and of course anytime you have bidding wars, that creates competition. And I believe, you know, 68% of respondents in Vancouver reported that they felt foreign buyers were a huge significance on prices. So that's the mindset of these buyers as well. And, you know, and then that's why you can see there's a huge support for foreign buyers tax. I mean, you have a huge chunk of people here that are saying that this is what they believe. And again, not to say that's wrong. We've certainly seen a huge influx of foreign capital, right? But I think it is the multitude of factors: foreign capital, low interest rates, landlocked city, where it's not easy to just, you know, just disperse outwards. So there's been a multitude of factors, but it's interesting to sort of see how they pulled the buyers and came to how the buyers are coming to their conclusions. I mean, I can certainly tell you from working with buyers on the street that that's certainly a lot of the feeling, right? It's sort of get in now. You had people buying 2, 3, 4 condos for their young kids, trying to secure places. I mean, that's just a mindset that creates sort of that speculative fear, that fear of missing out. And yeah, so I mean that's pretty much it. It's sort of a slower work week, I guess. We'll have to wait and see how things start to shape up. One of the themes that we've been talking about is a lower Canadian dollar. We're starting to see that. I believe the Canadian loonie dipped down to 75 cents. You know, the last time oil was this high, the Canadian dollar was at 82 cents. So that should basically tell you what investors are basically telling you about the Canadian economy. Bank of Canada's got a July rate hike coming up here, I believe on July the 11th. We'll have to wait and see if they follow the Fed with an interest rate hike. If they don't, again, you know, how does that spell for the loonie? You might want to postpone your U.S. vacation. This is certainly not a good outlook here moving forward. But again, as always, hope that helped. Any questions, comment below. Otherwise, we'll see you next week.